what I don't understand? When you apply for a normal job, you usually have to prove that you can actually do it. You submit a resume, you list your experience, you sit through an interview and explain why you are the perfect person for that position. Sometimes you even have to provide references, which is basically giving your future employer the phone number of someone willing to confirm, yes, this person is probably not lying. But imagine that you get hired and then your employer discovers that half your resume was complete nonsense. You claim that you had 10 years of experience, you had 10 minutes. You promised to increase revenue, you accidentally set the building on fire. You said you were proficient in Excel, you thought Excel was an energy drink. At some point, your boss would probably sit you down and say, "Look, mate, this isn't working out." And that would seem reasonable, because you got the job by convincing someone that you would do certain things. Now imagine something slightly worse. You go on a work trip with the company credit card. You're allowed to spend $5,000, but instead you spend $50,000. Flights, hotels, fancy dinners. When the company asks where the money went, you say, "Don't worry, it was all within the rules." Would your boss respond, "Fair enough, I'll see you on Monday"? Probably not. But now let's make the company much larger. The company is Australia. The employers are the Australian people, and the employees are the politicians we elect to run it. Every few years, they attend the world's biggest job interview. They stand in front of cameras. They give us their qualifications. They tell us what they will build, what they will fix, what they will cut, and what they definitely, absolutely, categorically will never do. Then we choose who gets the job. And after the election, some of those promises quietly begin evolving. A promise becomes a goal becomes an aspiration becomes, "We never technically said that." And somehow, despite managing hundreds of billions of dollars and making decisions that affect millions of people, politicians can appear to face less direct accountability than someone working at a suburban office. That seems backwards. And the more important your job is, the more accountability you should have. A pilot is held to a higher standard than someone operating a shopping trolley. A surgeon is held to a higher standard than someone cutting a sandwich. So, why wouldn't people running an entire country face some of the highest standards of all? Now, to be fair, governing a country is not exactly the same as working at Bunnings. Sometimes circumstances genuinely change. A global crisis happens, the economy collapses, a policy cannot pass through Parliament, new information becomes available. So automatically removing a government every time it changes a policy would be ridiculous. We would need an election every Thursday, but there is a major difference between changing course for a legitimate reason and saying whatever is necessary to get hired. That is where accountability becomes strange. In most areas of life, misleading somebody to obtain money, authority, or employment has consequences. But political promises often exist in a weird zone between commitment and an advertisement. Serious enough to win your vote, not always serious enough to enforce afterwards. And there is the money. Taxpayers, you, fund the entire operation. Every department, every program, every consultancy, every flight, office, allowance, and government project. Australia already has audits, budgets, parliamentary scrutiny, and public expenditure reporting. Those systems matter, but finding out exactly where the public money went and whether it achieved anything can still require digging. Digging through reports that look like they were deliberately formatted to make the human brain surrender. Technically public, psychologically classified. Imagine if your personal banking app worked like that. You open it, and instead of seeing you spent $47 on takeaway, it says Strategic Nutritional Procurement Initiative. That is often how public spending feels. So, what could better accountability look like? First, every major election promise could be recorded in one independent public database, not hidden across speeches, interviews, and 400-page policy documents. One promise, one cost, one deadline, one status, completed, in progress, blocked, changed, or abandoned. If it changes, the government should have to explain why in plain English, not political English, plain English. Second, major government spending should be easy for ordinary people to search. Who received the money? How much did they receive? What was it supposed to achieve, and did it actually work? Not every cent can be published instantly. Some spending involves national security, privacy, or commercial confidentiality. But there are exceptions should not become, therefore nobody gets to understand anything. Third, knowingly false political advertising should face meaningful consequences, not merely a disappointing headline 2 years later, actual consequences. Because democracy depends on voters making informed choices, and informed choices become difficult when political communication is treated like advertising, but without the same expectations we place on normal advertisers. And finally, perhaps we need a stronger mechanism for exceptional misconduct between elections. Not because voters should overturn an election whenever a politician becomes unpopular. Democracy cannot function like an online return policy. But when there is a serious, proven deception or abuse of public money, waiting several years for the next election can feel less like accountability and more like an employee finished their contract after discovering they stole the photocopier. The point is not that politicians are uniquely evil. Most are probably ordinary people operating inside a system that rewards winning, party loyalty, and short-term messaging. That is precisely why the system matters. Good rules are not created because every person is corrupt. They're created because eventually somebody will be. At the moment, elections are treated as the ultimate performance review. And technically they are. But imagine only being able to review an employee once every 3 years, no matter what they did in between. They could break promises, waste money, create a scandal, then arrive at the next interview with a new slogan and say, "This time we're focused on the future." And perhaps that is the strangest part. Politicians work for us. They spend our money. They ask us to hire them based on specific claims. Yet somewhere between the interview and the first day of work, the employer seems to lose most of the power. Maybe the answer is not forcing politicians to keep every promise under every circumstance. Maybe it is something more reasonable. Make every promise visible. Make every major expense understandable. Make every change explainable. and make deliberate deception carry an actual cost. Because if politicians want to describe themselves as public servants, perhaps the public should be allowed to conduct proper performance review. Brain Moss out.